Oh, Vanuatu, 2006. John and I went to a conference for Vanuatu researchers, which was a chance to connect with my past, right, and with Ralph Regenvanu. A chance to see Michael Allen from Australia, who I hadn't seen in years, and just Barry Wakeman, who had been a big influence on me in terms of his work on agriculture, and others. We had a lovely time. What I remember most about it was that it was the very first time I actually drank kava. All of the time I had been in Vanuatu, I had been told that good girls don't drink kava, that Ni Vanuatu women didn't drink kava, which is it's a drink, probably widely known to your viewers, made from the root of a Piper methysticum. It's a pepper plant. And even the Queen has consumed kava, but Fijian kava, which is very weak, and Vanuatu kava is notoriously strong. So my husband Bill had drunk kava. John, my new husband, was really keen to try it. And he did, and he could barely walk. But not daunted, my friend Jean Terry Sesse said, "Come on, Margaret, times have changed. It's okay. Women drink kava now. Let's go to the kava bar," which they had many of by then in Port Vila, "and let's have a few shells." So we did. And it was good, but not repeatable in my judgment. It gave me a lovely sense of connection with all of humanity and nature. But boy, does it taste bad. And we did enjoy our trip to Vanuatu, and didn't get back to Ambai that time. We did go to Tana, which was very enjoyable. By that time, I had started one more research project, which was entirely different. And it was on holistic centers, these places, retreat centers that Westerners go to for personal development, spiritual connection, and that sort of thing. And I had, amazingly to me, received a SSHRT grant to do this that included some time off. That project was really an opportunity to do something I was personally very curious about. It was a sweet project. It was really enjoyable. It really did something for my own personal growth. I learned a great deal, and I ended up writing up very little of it, which I'm disappointed in myself about, but the circumstances were such that that's what happened. I went to Kalani, a retreat center in Hawaii on the Big Island, Mount Madonna in California, Brighton Bush Hot Springs in Oregon, Harbin Hot Springs, which is since burned to the ground, in Northern California, and two places here, one on Gabriola Island, a Haven Institute, and Hollyhock, which is up on Cortez Island. And I was particularly interested in how these places function. It was kind of an old structural functionist analysis, but also based on the built form, the social construction of that space, what kind of leadership structures they had, why people were attracted to live there. Some of them had resident communities, some of them didn't. And the relationship between running workshops and retreats to pay the bills and for their mission, and the relationship between that and the leadership of the community, and what it's like to live in the communities. People were really generous with their time with me, and I got a lot of insight into those transitions of leadership that are so critical in utopian communities, and the difficulty that charismatic leaders have generally in passing the torch to the next generation. So this was very interesting with Mount Madonna, where they had a guru who led them who had taken a vow of silence in the 1950s, used a chalkboard to signal his messages, and was concerned about the transition. He was by then in his 80s, the transition to the next generation, and yet it was not obvious how that was going to work. It was a big operation with a school that they ran in a complex place, and not so easy. And others, there was a charismatic leader at Harbin Hot Springs who had plans for succession, but ones that weren't widely shared with the larger community. At Brighton Bush, the founding father had handed the community over to the community, and they were doing really very well without a single leader, like a single person who was in charge. So there were a lot of lessons in that research for me. And in the end of it, I had come out to Sooke, the little town in British Columbia, where I now live, on sabbatical in 2004. I'd come out to do some writing for that project. Also, what ended up happening was that I spent most of the year completing the work with Listen and Jean long distance on the House Girl project. So you know how it is. So one project bleeds into the other one, if you like, and you end up doing the work on one that you were supposed to be doing. Well, you're supposed to be starting a new one. Anyway, don't tell anybody, but that's what happens. So I was out here on sabbatical leave in 2004. I came out also because my son and daughter-in-law were having their first child, or what became their first child, and I wanted to be here. And I'd also gotten smart enough not to spend my sabbaticals at my home university, because whenever I stayed home on leave, I never got my work done. So, because there's nobody else who can do this. You need to help us on our committee or whatever, right? So I was happily out here, and I began talking to people out in Sooke about starting a community of our own. And we were just talking, as people do, friends, get some friends together, let's buy a big farm. That was our talk at the time. Let's buy a big farm, we'll have a community building, and we'll have some little houses around it. That'd be fun. And we sort of looked at land, kind of. We talked about starting a co-op, kind of. And meanwhile, I'm doing this research on the holistic centers. At the end of that sabbatical year, and I had rented, I should add, a little cottage right on the ocean, on the outer coast. We're now in the harbor, which is very protected, but the outer coast is quite wild, and wow, is it fascinating. And I was watching whales blowing offshore, and sea lions were coming by every day, and otters, and I really didn't want to go back to Toronto. It was that simple. I didn't want to go back for another Toronto winter, and all of that. So I found that I could reduce my teaching load in anticipation of retirement. So I did that and went back to York between 2005 and 2010. I went back one term a year. Unfortunately, my department wanted the winter term, so I went for the winter term. Got some good cross-country skiing in, and taught there, and then came right back out here. And it was during that period that I met John, with whom I traveled to Vanuatu in 2006. So the work on holistic centers transformed itself into walking my talk, if you like. I used to teach a course called Anthropology of Space and Place, and in that course I would teach about eco-villages, utopian communities, and about something called cohousing, which was introduced to North America in the late 80s. And I got the book hot off the press and began teaching about it. It was brought to North America by Charles Durée and Catherine McCammett, two California architects, who had discovered it whilst doing their training in Denmark. And in Northern Europe, cohousing is a very common form of housing, both for young families. It's very popular with young families because your kids all play together. You don't have to drive anywhere for a play date, and it's also, and you can come home and somebody else will have cooked dinner. It's your turn once every 6 weeks, and it's also popular increasingly with seniors. So I had taught this, and I was increasingly drawn to it. I had been quite drawn to living in a co-op, but there were a number of reasons why that didn't really work. By that time, we owned a house, and it was hard to imagine going from owning a house to living in a co-op. But by mid 2005 or 6 or whatever it was, this was a whole lot more appealing idea. And having taught about co-housing, I thought, well, what if we just did it? And by 2010, I was done with kind of the exploratory, well, let a couple of friends, let's have an idea. And I just was putting my mother in a retirement home, and none of the options were good. None of them. They were nice, but not what I wanted. They were institutional, and they were really expensive. And so I knew that in Canada, it's not as, she was going into a home in the States, but I knew in Canada it was different, but it still didn't look very good to me. And I also attended about that fall of 2010, a talk by David Suzuki at the British Columbia Museum here that inspired me, and it was on legacy, and it was on, well, that old saw about being the change you want to see in the world, and if not now, when? And I just took it to heart, and I said to a friend of mine, she's an osteopath, so she works on people's body and their muscular and skeletal health, and she was also dealing with a mother. And I said to my friend Gail, let's just see if people are interested. So we called a meeting above the local grocery store, and 30 people showed up, and we took it from there. And that was end of 2010. 2011 we built the group, and by 2012 we had hired a project manager, somebody in Burnaby who was extremely good at this, and we had formed a company to buy this property that was a resort. It had one building on it. My daughter had been married in it in 2008, and it was adaptable to become a common house. That is a place where we could have our group meals, meetings, film nights, games, can our fruit, have a library, and accommodate guests. And then we had all of that, and we had a wharf where we could have our boats and our kayaks and our canoes and our sailboats. If we had all of that, then we could have small homes. And I co-facilitated a course 13 times between 2011 and 2014 with an architect, Andrew Moore, and he's also a community developer and works with the Sooke Nation, the First Nation here in town. We co-facilitated a course on aging well in community. So I found myself suddenly using my anthropological skills in a new way. I was interviewing people. People were interviewing me. That was new. We were doing inviting people to join us. We were learning how to put that invitation out. We were creating boundaries. We were creating a culture, right? I was teaching, facilitating. That was a lot more fun than teaching, and I didn't have to mark anybody, and I didn't have to serve on any committees, at least not of the academic kind. One of the things that we did from the beginning was to provide guidelines and model behavior for how people were to interact with each other in meetings. So no interrupting, no swearing, no walking out, none of the things that I have heard academic colleagues do sometimes. It was so exciting to see that you could raise the bar on human interaction and they would meet you. We had conflicts, and that became, instead of I want to get out of here moment, an opportunity to develop better skills to work through the conflicts. I began doing work at the Haven on Gabriola, which is a center for personal growth and leadership, and learned a lot of communication skills, which I'm still developing. We built after we'd purchased the property from the landowner, Captain Ralph, who became a member of the group. We learned a lot about those transitions in leadership that I'd been studying at the retreat centers. Because what a big transition for him. He'd lived on the property for 18 years, and suddenly it didn't look anything like it did when he started. We used to have big fir trees down there. And he had to give up control and still be a valued member of the community. Not easy. Still not easy for him. Not always easy for us. and totally worthwhile. And he loves it here. And I think it's fair to say we all do. So that process began to consume most of my time. It was all volunteer. We built this as a non-profit development company with $70,000 in grants and loans from Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. But the rest of the $12 million budget came from us, and in the end from us, because it was the money with which we purchased the homes at the end of the day. We were sold out before we started construction, all 31 units. And we had a waiting list when we moved in of 15. And then the Sunday edition on CBC Radio picked us up last fall of 2015, as the construction was nearing completion. And our list of, our waiting list, which became an interested list because it's just a strata title at the end of the day, and you can't really have a waiting list. It went from 15 to 200. With the broadcast of that program. It was re-aired at August the 28th of this year, and our waiting list, which was by then about 250, zipped up to almost 400. So there's a huge demand, a hunger, I would say, for what we have created here in Harborside. We're the first senior-focused co-housing in BC, and only the second in Canada. And so I continue to work with a little nonprofit called the it's a little nonprofit with a big name, Canadian Senior Co-Housing Society, to raise awareness about this as an option and to promote it across the country. We have another one starting in Sooke and one in north of Victoria, toward up the Saanich Peninsula, and a huge amount of interest. And why is that? And I think it all comes back to the anthropological base of it, is that we are social animals, and we want to be in connection with our neighbors. We want to be in relationship with others. And I learned in Melanesia how really, in some sense, people are defined through their society. They are socially created persons. And there's lots of work in Melanesia on social personhood, right? It's not all there is to it, but it's such an important part of it. And here we live in isolation from each other, and as we age, we have no support, and we expire because of social isolation. It's the biggest problem facing this demographic, and so co-housing offers an answer for at least some of those people, and for us, it's been extremely beneficial, because we have that opportunity to connect and the opportunity to work through conflict and the opportunity to laugh and dance and have a lot of joy together. So I'm still keeping a journal because I'm an anthropologist. We have two PhD student and a master's student coming to study us after Thanksgiving. I hope we'll have more. I think it's really important to document this process, and we have a good archive going. We have a historian living here who's very helpful with that, and it's just going to be interesting to see where the journey takes me next, because I've retired as a professor of anthropology quite happily, but I will never retire from being an anthropologist. So thank you for the opportunity to do this. I'm really very grateful for the opportunity to, in fact, kind of the obligation, to prepare for and then reflect on my professional career, and I've enjoyed the chance to do this.